week we will read a double portion. Vayakhel and Pekuday. We're going to start out of order. We're going to start with Pekuday. So please turn to page 530 if you have the art scroll. Page 530. And if you don't have an art scroll, just turn to Parshas Pekuday, which is chapter Lamed Ches, Pasuk Chaf Aleph. Now, in Parshas Pekuday, we will begin with it begins with the list, or the listing of the amounts of gold, silver, copper that were indeed contributed to the construction of the Mishkan. A list. It is a parsha that indicates that Jewish accountants have to wake up and get to work. It's the season of accounting, Parshas Pekuday. Now, very good. With that, there are a few very interesting things that are derived from this section. Number one, there's a statement in Halach and Shulchan Aruch that if a community designates an individual to be in charge of charity, people should not drive him nuts. People should not question him. They should trust him. This is a statement. Nevertheless, the authorities note, it is appropriate for the individual himself to go ahead and provide or have open books that the community could know that he's trustable, that he is not pocketing the funds. So it's not that the community places the responsibility upon him, but rather it's recommended that the individual himself be open. Where is this derived from? That even the righteous individual designated for this mission should be open with his decisions. So the Bach, one of the authorities, notes that if you look in this week's Parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu gave a full accounting of everything that was collected, and the amount that was used, the amount of gold and the amount of silver and copper that was used for the structure. That no one should imagine that Moshe himself sent some of the funds to a bank in Switzerland. That's what the Bach notes. Okay. So it's interesting that specifically here, we come up with this idea that Moshe Rabbeinu was attempting or trying to avoid suspicion. Keep that in mind, specifically here in Parshas Pekuday. Now I'm going to share with you a rabbinic statement in the Talmud, Maseches Tanis, page 11. The statement asks the following question. The last 7 days of the calendar year, beginning with the 23rd of Adar, which is this weekend, those last 7 days have a name. They have a name. They are called the Shivas Yemei Hamiluim. The 7 days of fulfilling or filling yourself or preparing yourself. Why are the last 7 days of the year called that? Reason being, the first day of Nisan is when they actually inaugurated the Mishkan. 7 days leading to the first day of Nisan, the mode of the Mishkan was in preparation. They were constructing it and then taking it apart. They were preparing themselves to this wonderful event of building the Mishkan. Moshe Rabbeinu took the lead position as high priest during those 7 days. Very interesting. Moshe Rabbeinu was not the high priest, it was Aaron. But during the 7-day period, Moshe Rabbeinu took it upon himself, where he was the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted, that he take upon himself that responsibility. So the last 7 days of the year. Remember, we are now in the 12th month. The month of Adar is the end of the year. The last 7 days are indeed the last 7 days of the year. Moshe Rabbeinu becomes the high priest. Day 1, the first day of the year, Aaron takes over that responsibility. So during those 7 days, they were very unique, and they were known as the Shivat Yemei, the 7 days of preparation. Commentators note that these days, actually, the last days of the year, symbolize as well the end of time. Symbolize the end of time. Acharit hayamim, a term that we used to go ahead and describe the end of days. In what way? How do they correspond to one another? So, some note, when you talk about Hillel and Shammai. So, if you would be asked, what's the difference in philosophy? Because they have many practical disagreements. What's their disagreement when it comes to philosophy? So some would note that Hillel related more to people. He understood that this is a religion that we have to go ahead, and I don't know if I would use the word adjustment, but we have to be realistic that we are dealing with people, and therefore there are indeed statements in the Torah that we have to understand and read them with the reality that people are human and they are not perfect. Shammai demanded perfection. And it was a much higher spiritual level, but the reality is that it won't work in the world. We are in a world with humans, and therefore the Torah was given to humans and not to angels. Shammai was that higher level, and you could go ahead and really claim that in some ways Aaron corresponds, Aaron HaKohen, Ohev Shalom, Rodev Shalom. He was close to people, related to people. He was more a follower of the Hillel philosophy, and Shammai was a follower of the strict letter of the law, individual being Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, therefore, Hillel could go ahead and say, you want to be a good person? Heveh mitalmidav shel Aharon. And on the other hand, the Talmud notes that Shammai would use the term Yikov Hadin et Tahar, that if there's a law, I don't care if there's a mountain there, let the law go through the mountain. If that is indeed what we are supposed to do, ignore reality, ignore the weakness of the human condition, let the letter of the law move forward. That is Moshe Rabbeinu and / Shammai philosophy. So now when the Talmud makes another statement, that at the end of days we are going to follow Shammai, now I don't know if that means a practical halachic statement or one, the concept. The idea is that at the end of days there's going to be some kind of clarity that will allow all humans to be elevated and be on that level of following Shammai. So you see what I'm trying to get to is that Moshe Rabbeinu has some kind of relationship to the end of days when everyone will be elevated and be able to stick to his standard. So the last 7 days of the year, we could call them the 7 days of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's what we could go ahead and say. Fine. Now, back to the statement in the Talmud. The Talmud asks, if Moshe Rabbeinu, on those 7 days of the last days of Adar, which correspond, which represent perhaps the end of days, what kind of garment did he use? In other words, we find descriptions regarding the garments of Aaron and his children and the Kohanim. What kind of garment did Moshe Rabbeinu use? So the Talmud tells us that he used the chaluk, kind of robe, shirt, she'ein lo, and this is the key term here, ein lo imra, that had no cuffs, that had no hem. He had a garment that had no hems, no cuffs. Why did it have no cuffs? Answer being, Moshe was trying to avoid suspicion. If he's going to go ahead and be dealing with a ton of gold and pieces of gold and silver, and there are going to be cuffs, and if he walks home one day a bit slower because he had a long day, people are going to say, you know what's pulling him down? The gold that he put in his cup. So to avoid suspicion, Moshe Rabbeinu, as we are constructing on these 7 days, very unique days, the special days of Moshe Rabbeinu, he is the high priest. For the 7-day period, he wears a garment that will remove all questions and suspicion. That's a Talmudic statement. One of those disturbing statements that here we are, the Jewish people, and we question Moshe Rabbeinu. You would imagine that the Moshe Rabbeinu days Everybody would treat him like with such dignity and trust everything he does. It wasn't so. Sometimes we have the ability of looking back at history, at the heroes of the past, and assessing them with greatness, but the era itself, the people in that generation, did not appreciate them to the fullest. In the world, in the Torah world, we have a tremendous amount of respect, and indeed we sense the greatness of the Chafetz Chaim. There's so many stories we grew up with about the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim passed away in 1933. And he was a tzaddik, and he was a tremendous Torah scholar, and his righteousness and his concern and every word, how he balanced every word, and the awareness that we have today in this generation of Lashon Hara, which indicates we are indeed a very great generation, because 100 years ago there was not such sensitivity. The sensitivity and the upgrade that the nation of Israel has during this generation is a lot due to the Chafetz Chaim. Fine. So if you would imagine that if you studied in the yeshiva in Radin in the 20s, and you had the opportunity to spend a minute with the Chafetz Chaim, you would do anything to go ahead and spend time with him and to hear from his wisdom. But let me share with you a fact. The fact is, I heard this from Rabbi Keller, who heard from one of the disciples who lived during the time. The Chafetz Chaim had his own personal minyan at home when he was an older man. There was the yeshiva minyan, and he had a minyan at home. It was a large yeshiva, and he wanted to have a minyan, and he made a request that Bochum should come for his minyan. Bochum did not want to go to his minyan. Why? Because after davening he would get up and he would teach some Torah, give a Dvar Halacha. I don't know if you're read for the Mishnah Berurah or something, but he would give a Dvar Halacha. And he kept the boys there longer, and they didn't want to stay there. They wanted to go back to their own learning or to eat breakfast or for a smoke. So they tried avoiding that minyan. And some of the disciples note that years later, when they look back and they share it with others, people don't, want to get. What do you mean? You don't want to spend a minute with the Chafetz Chaim? That's a reality of how we work. That we develop an appreciation for greatness once it's in the books, once a history book. But as we are living it, we don't appreciate it. And that's the reality of how we can read about the Moshe Rabbeinu. Imagine our ancestors standing there in the wilderness, looking at Moshe as we hear every word of him, understanding that this is Torah, but at the same time looking at his cuffs to be sure that he's not carrying pieces of gold.
That's like Parsha goes Achrei Mos Kedoshim.
Achrei Mos Kedoshim. That's the idea. That's a sad reality, and perhaps it's to remind us to appreciate what we have. Now, with it, what I want to share with you is the fact that if the last 7 days of the year symbolize the end of days, and at the same time, there are indications that there was a period of time when there was a lack of trust. I think that this also relates to our period, that we are in a period of wisdom, and at the same time, we hope a period that is closer to the concept of end of days. And I'm not taking the end of days as my colleagues in Walmart in the South, when I was in the South, and they would see that I have a yarmulke, and people these people would walk over, these Southerners, and say, "Oh, we love Jews, we love Israel. The big battle's coming. The end of days are coming." In other words, that was their impression of the end of days, that a big bomb is going to go off and destroy half the planet. I have a little bit of a different approach, a more optimistic approach to this concept of end of days. But nevertheless, I'm comfortable to say we are in a period of the good end of days, when there's no longer going to be war, when the world will recognize our right to the land of Israel. But nevertheless, I think that the concept of suspicion is very much part of, quote-unquote, the end of days. Reason being, as part of the human race, there's no question that there's been a great upgrade in our intellectual capabilities. In other words, humanity has upgraded. If you take the world, past 5,000, 6,000 years, or as long as you want to go ahead and claim that humans aren't existed, and you want to go ahead and look at the world, look at Europe, look at Europeans 2,000 years ago, and look at Europeans today. So you'll say they're still savage, but the reality is that there's intellect. We have achieved with our minds. We have created, we understand nature much better. We understand medicine. We are more scientific. There is indeed an upgrade. And a lot of it is the byproduct. You could go ahead and trace it back to Yavon, to Greece. And at the same time that the world is upgrading its intellectual abilities, Torah has been upgraded. Torah has been upgraded. In other words, the ability that we have to understand Torah, the ability that we have to understand to take the halachic system and break it down and to compare it to new realities. There is indeed an upgrade which we call the development of Torah Shebe'al Peh. The Torah Shebe'al Peh, we don't really find these debates and in-depth discussions during the first temple period, but during the second, and as it was very fascinating, is that the more we are entering into exile mode, the greater the darkness, the more we have that internal light of Torah that's developing. This is one of the concepts that the Netziv talks about often. Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, the Rosh Hashiva Volozhin in the 19th century, that what exile provided for us was an enhancement of our intellectual abilities and understanding of Torah. So there's an upgrade. So the end of day symbolizes a success in the area of the intellect. But when you're an intellectual individual, you question things. You question, if in a piece of information, if I go ahead and am provided some text, and the text claims some kind of rabbinic statement, the first thing I'm going to do is going to question, who says this is true? Or even better, in this day and age, I'm going to go ahead and ask, who says that this was not corrupted? Show me the original source. When was it reprinted? What other editions exist? I am going to start, and the way I achieve understanding is by questioning. So this is an era of questioning. When it's used for the good, we develop an understanding. When on the other hand, we become cynical, and we start questioning that our leaders are doing it for their own benefit, when we start believing that the only reason a specific president or king made a decision is because of his campaign for re-election, when we become cynical, that's when the intellect could become harmful. So the idea that Moshe Rabbeinu specifically has to wear this garment that avoided suspicion during a period of time that symbolizes the end of days is to tell us nowadays, number one, it's good that we question. Questioning is good. Don't believe everything you are told. Someone tells you that from now on, for Pesach, you're not allowed to even, brush your teeth, period. Don't believe. You have to ask them, what's your source? You have to go ahead and question. But at the same time, the cynicism that could be the byproduct of it is what we are supposed to avoid, and that's what the Torah is telling us, that number one, the nation shouldn't have asked such questions about Moshe Rabbeinu, but Moshe Rabbeinu had the responsibility of wearing clothes that avoided suspicion. So that's the idea in the beginning of this week's Parsha, Parshas Pekuday. Now, let's start reading the text itself, so we could turn to Pasuk Chaf Aleph. Eile Pekudei HaMishkan. Here's the reckoning. And this was, of course, Mishkan Ha'edus. And who is in charge of this process? Pukad al pi Moshe. Fine. Okay, so Moshe Rabbeinu plays a significant role. But he's not alone, but rather he has two crucial partners. Number one, and note the names, we've addressed this in the past, but we're going to have to return to today. Big player number one, who's Uvetzalel. Betzalel was a craftsman. What's the name of the school on Agrippas, I think it is? The Betzalel school. Of art. What? Of art, right? Craft. So Betzalel. Ben Uri, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, who was from the tribe of Yehuda. Yehuda was viewed as the leading tribe. You had Yichus if you were from Yehuda. Also, and he went ahead and he constructed Et Kol Asher Tziva Hashem, everything. Es Kol is a very inclusive statement. Okay, as Moshe. Next. Ve'ito, and together with him was a fellow by the name of Aholiav, the son of Achisamach, but he was from Mateh Dan, the tribe of Dan. Dan was a tribe that we have had some problems with them. They make their appearance in the pagan culture later on. Remember when we visited northern Israel, we visited Dan, and we talked about the pagan temple there. That was not the first pagan temple. There was a fellow by the name of Micha, who was already alive according to tradition in the days of the wilderness, who had already an agenda for paganism. They were people that were known as, they were placed in the back of the camp, but nevertheless, Judaism tells us it makes no difference what your yichus is. What you do with yourself is what is indeed an achievement. And therefore, Ahaliyav ben Achamisamach was also a player and played a very significant part in the construction of the Mishkan. And here we go, gold, silver. Fine, wonderful. Keep those psukim in mind. There's a statement in the Jerusalem Talmud Yerushalmi. The Talmud Yerushalmi is trying to seek, to find sources for the structure of our Shmon Esrei, for our Amidah. Amidah is very interesting because there are numbers flying around. On Shabbos we have the 7 blessings. On Rosh Hashanah we have 9. On a fast day they used to have 24. They did away with it. It would be hard to get out by 7 with the 20, but they had it at one period at 24. And during the weekday we have how many blessings in our 18 blessings? 19. Only Jews could do that, right? That we could go ahead and claim it's still 18 because my Alta Zayda, my great-great-great-great-grandfather, considered it the 18 blessings. So therefore, even at we have 19, we're still going to call it the 18. So they want to find sources. So comes the Yerushalmi and tells us that you should know if you want to go ahead and find a source for the 18 blessings, you got to turn to Parshas Pekuday. This week's Parsha gives us a source for the 18 blessings. Where exactly, what are there 18 ofs in this week's Parsha? So if you turn the page and you keep an eye out for the words, Ka'asher Tziva Hashem Es Moshe. And if you have the beginning of chapter 39, verse, at the end of verse 1, it's the end of a paragraph, so it's easy to notice it. Kasher Tziva Hashem Es Moshe. At the end of the next paragraph, at the end of verse 5, Kasher Tziva Hashem Es Moshe. At the end of verse 7. And then if you turn to the next page, to chapter 39, verse 21, it ends Kasher Tziva Hashem Es Moshe. And then again, at the end of verse 20, is Kasher Tziva Hashem Es Moshe. And I only counted 5 so far. So Kasher Tziva Hashem Es Moshe are everywhere throughout the portion. If you add them up, at least claims the Yerushalmi so, in Parshas Pekuday, how many do you get? 18. Now, I actually counted. And of course, there's one extra, it seems to be. In other words, it seems to be, if you turn to the beginning of the portion, verse 22, we are told that Bitzalel, the second verse in the portion, so it's verse 22. Bitzalel, Ben Uri, Ben Hor, Matei, Yudah, Asais, Kol, Asher, Tziva, Hashem, Es Moshe. I counted that one. I counted it. And by counting that one, I got 19. But let's be fair. The Yerushalmi says you get 18 if you start from the following verse. If you start, it's cheating, huh? If you start from Ve'ito, Ahaliyav ben Achisamach, if you start from there, then you will end up with 18. So I could do that with anything, like... What? You might, you can take one less, one more, but...
forcing the number.
You're slipping. What's going on here?
They knew that the Lamashimim would be added.
Oh, so they knew, so don't call it 18. So what's going on here? So now...
18's fine.
So idea is this following. Yes, true. 18 is indeed high. Why is it that why do we still call it the 18 blessings? Let's face it, they added a 19th. They added the 19th probably in the beginning of the 2nd century. There's been plenty of time. There's been plenty of time to start calling it the Chai Esrei. It doesn't have the nice ring as Shmon Esrei, but they could have called it the Chai Esrei. Why are we so stubborn? So the reality is that we have to keep in mind that the 19th blessing is a bitter pill to swallow. We don't really want it there. It's a necessity. We have no choice. But the reality is that the additional blessing, and what do I mean by the additional blessing? So there is a blessing in Shmon Esrei, which again is much later. And in that blessing, we turn to the Almighty, and by the way, the text that we have that 19th blessing, and it's not the 19th in order, it's in the middle. When we go ahead and say it's a blessing against the heretics, that the slanderers should have no hope, the wicked shall perish, enemies cut down, uproot, smash, cast down humble sinners. One of those blessings, like very firm ones. And this is not the original. There's been many adjustments because some of them have mentioned, some indicated that they're talking about the early Christians. Some of them said Apikorsim. Everyone had their different reading of it. It's one of those blessings that when people would claim that, aha, do you mean us? We would say, no, and they would make an adjustment. Many adjustments were made with this blessing. But the idea behind it is as follows. The Jewish world in the beginning of the 2nd century was under attack. We had people that dressed like Torah Jews, talked like Torah Jews, acted like Torah Jews, right? And as you know, or this prime minister would say, like a dog. And the problem was that they were believers in a new player in the Middle East known as JC. They were believers in him. So they would come to synagogues. They knew how to daven very nicely. They would lead the congregation. They would inspire others with their behavior. They accepted probably every chumrah in the book. So they were extremely charismatic. And the result being was that once you got to know them, they would start teaching these new teachings that we should go ahead and realize that the Messiah has arrived already. And they would have proofs, and they would pull out some kind of Tanakh with a translation or a mistranslation. It was a serious problem. And how would you keep them out of the community? So Rav Gamliel sensed, the great rabbinic authority of the period sensed, that we have to go ahead and exclude them. Because if we don't exclude such people, we're going to go ahead and implode. We're going to self-destroy. So this statement, when we went ahead and in every person was commanded, was ordered, that in the Shemon Esrei, you add a blessing to exclude people, so you would step out of your Shemon Esrei with an awareness. There are people that have to be excluded. It was a necessity, but it's not the one we like. It's not the ideal. In essence, Judaism, tefillah, and specifically a shul, a beis knesses, and a temple is a place where everyone is welcome. We want everyone to feel that they're welcome. The concept of excluding Jews due to the fact that they are making a mistake, due to the fact that they're not perfect, due to the fact that they don't have a background or the education, is something that is far from ideal. It is a painful reality that at times are indeed necessary, that we go out and claim that only such people that have a specific philosophy could walk into our hallway. It's sad, again, but it was necessary. Now, to remind us for eternity that this blessing really, ideally, should not belong here. We go ahead and we call our Amidah not the 19, because this blessing is an outsider. Ideally, we don't want it. Ideally, we don't want such people to go ahead and harm us, because we don't want to have to exclude anyone. We are a welcoming religion. And it's interesting that naturally, every Jew has a part in the korbanos. In other words, for example, Moshe Rabbeinu is challenged by Korach. Remember him? Korach challenges him. So Moshe Rabbeinu turns to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and his first thing he asks the Ribono Shel Olam is, Al Teifen El Minchasam. The commentators explain what Moshe Rabbeinu says, that these are people, they are rebelling against me. By rebelling against me, they are harming the structure of our society. And if the structure falls apart, the society falls apart. But they are protected spiritually, because the reality is that every single Jew has a part in the sacrifices. And if they are protected spiritually, so the reality is that I cannot really fight them. They have the spiritual protection because the temple, the shul, is theirs as well. And if they are part of a shul, they are part of the society. So therefore he had to make a special request to keep them out. Meaning, naturally speaking, every single Jewish person has part of the korbanot. Every single Jewish person has part in shul. You know, there's an issue that developed in Spain in the 13th century. One of the Tshuvot Harashba was that there was a fellow who donated an area, an expansion of the Aron Kodesh. He donated, he fixed it. Detailed story, but after he donated it, he came up with the idea of writing his name on top. And maybe it was the first one. Donated by so-and-so. And the community got upset. You know, like, what do you mean donated? But why is your name up there? It used to be Anochi Hashem Elokecha, and now it's donated by, you know, David so-and-so. Like, what is this all about? So the Rashba defends it. And he says that it's a good thing to do because you encourage others. He was very pro, and that became the norm. But at the same time, he makes it very clear that when a person gives something to a community, in other words, if I make a donation to a shul, I can't retain rights over it. In other words, I can't go ahead and say I am donating a specific, benches to a shul, but I only want my friends to sit on it. Only people that are nice to me, right? Or only people that are, fans of my football team. In other words, you can't do that. If you donate it, you have to realize that it belongs to everyone. A shul, a temple, and tefillah belongs to all of Klal Yisrael. So tefillah really is an 18. Tefillah is an 18. Unfortunately, we have that 19th blessing, and the idea of the 19th blessing is that indeed we have to go ahead and accept the leadership of specific individuals who illuminate the way. And if we don't have that illumination, if people ignore the teachings of the leader, they are going to be, it's painful, they're going to be excluded. So that's the idea of our shul. Now,
Why was the place where it's playing? Why was Bla Mashinim put in the middle?
we just mentioned the fact that we want justice, correct? We want justice. So we go ahead and we talk about a justice, accepting those who are worthy of guiding us. So immediately following that, the Gemara gives us a few explanations why. But one of them, the simple one, would be that we just dealt with justice, so now we have to uproot the characters that are indeed destroying the leadership of those who have that, the light of Torah guiding them. Now let's return to this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha. There is a 19th one. There is a 19th one. But the rabbis are telling us that it's 18, not including, let's read that verse again. So it's verse 22. Verse 22 is the one that the Talmud Yerushalmi tells us it is not included in the 18, and as you said, it's the 19th one. And it talks about a fellow by the name of Bitzalel ben Uri ben Hur. Okay? Now let's analyze the name. Number one, when we talk about the luchos, we say that the letters were charut, etched. And what do the rabbis tell us? That the word charut relates to the word cherut, meaning freedom. And we are being taught that Jewish freedom only comes about as a result of commitment to Torah. In other words, you're not a free being. If a person, for example, has an addiction to chocolate, and they get a job in a chocolate factory. There was once an I Love Lucy. There was an I Love Lucy. You see, I know things that were black and white. There was an I Love Lucy that they went to work, and Lucy and her neighbor. Ethel. I don't know that well. So they ate a lot of chocolates. So were they free? Indeed, they got a stomachache afterwards. That's not freedom. Freedom is not to do whatever you want. Freedom is to do what you really want. But you have to figure out what you really want. So for the Torah Jew to go ahead and fulfill the will of the Ribono Shel Olam, to go ahead and follow the luchos, the cherus is cherus. Follow that which was etched, you are indeed free. And the result is that the freedom brings about the light of Torah. There's a darkness in the world. We're seeking purpose. There's a tremendous amount of light. So Bitzalel, his grandfather was Hur, symbolizes the freedom, and his dad was Uri, ben Uri. But you should know that there are sometimes people that are so engulfed in the light cannot really function. In other words, we are believers that what we are supposed to do is take our talents in the physical world, where Ribono Shel Olam is concealed, and do it for the sake of heaven. In other words, if I am an expert craftsman, or I am an expert winemaker, so no one can tell me that wine making on its own is spiritual. But if I go ahead and do it for the right reason, if I make wine because I want to make kosher wine, and I want to make high quality wine that people can enjoy for Shabbos and for Pesach, so then suddenly I am bringing light into an area that is naturally concealed. I should take the light and bring it into the shade. And that's what Bitzalel was, that brilliant craftsman. He was an artist, and he did it for the sake of heaven. So his father is the Or, but he was Bitzel. Tzel is the shadow of the Ribono Shel Olam. In other words, he knew how to deal with the physical world where there's a concealment of light, where the light is limited, but he brought the light into it. So his name symbolizes that leadership of Torah, straight leadership of Torah that comes from the tribe of Yehuda, the symbol of the house of Rabban Gamliel as well, royalty. So that's what he symbolizes. In prayer, in essence, to go ahead and believe that the only people that can pray, or the only people that have a right to the tabernacle, or to the temple, to the Beis Hamikdash, or to the Mishkan, are the Betzalels, is a terrible statement. In other words, to believe that Betzalel is this guy that I turn to for prayer. Betzalel has the legal right to utilize the Mishkan for spirituality, not me. That's a terrible statement. We don't want to go ahead and use the Shmoneh Esrei, which symbolizes prayer, to begin with him. We want to begin after him. So you see the idea. Now, who is the individual mentioned after him that we begin prayer with? In other words, if there are 18 Kasher Tziva Hashem es Moshe, and the Jerusalem Talmud Yerushalmi tells us that begin the count from this verse, Ve'ito, with him, with this elevated, lofty fellow, was a fellow by the name of a holy Av. You know, Dan, the tribe of Dan, they were lost. They were lost spiritually. But if someone within that tribe wants to relate to the Ribono Shel Olam, so even if he doesn't have a father, he doesn't have a father who guides him, because perhaps his father is not on that high spiritual level, he could turn to the tent of the Ribono Shel Olam, to the Mishkan, and he could say, I can find my father in heaven, in this tent. Oh, Hali, this temple, the Ohel, the tent of meeting, which is the Mishkan, is like my father. And if there's another Jewish person who's like a brother to me and he gives me the support to go ahead and grow spiritually, if I don't have it at home, if my Jewish brother will support me, so my brother is like an Achi, Samach is my support. So these are names that indicate that he is not from that elevated status. He's not a product of the light. He is a product of, loneliness and lowliness, and he is elevated by his spiritual commitment from within. That is tefillah. And that's why the 18 begins in that verse where his name is mentioned. Nevertheless, the 19th blessing, which is a blessing of unfortunately excluding individuals and indicating that we do need that leaders, we do need leadership to guide us, who we have to, at times, unfortunately, exclude, that is the Betzalel, and that is the 19th. So we have a little bit of an idea of why specifically the Talmud Yerushalmi, goes ahead and shares with us the number 18. So that's what we have for Pekuday. Now I want to share with you one Bar Torah that relates to Vayakhel. When I was a kid, a little boy, there was a story I enjoyed, the story of Dama ben Nesina. You know the story of Dama ben Nesina? You know him? Good. Dama ben Nesina was no dummy. He was a fellow, he was a non-Jew, lived in the area of Ashkelon. And the Talmud shares with us the following story. There was once a crisis that the high priest, believe it or not, lost a stone from the breastplate. I mean, just think about it. He comes in one day to the Beis Hamikdash. They say, Kohen Gadol, I see 11 there. He goes, Gewalt. He lost one of the stones. So they went ahead and they did a little bit of research. Where do I find the 12th stone? And they found out there's a fellow, a wealthy individual, seems to be down in Ashkelon, a non-Jew by the name of Dama ben Nesina. Turn to him, he will provide for you the stone. So they send down a delegation, and they ask him for the stone, and he says, you know what, I'm willing to sell you the stone, no problem, but there's one issue, is that it's in a safe, the keys are in a box, and my father sleeps on it. My father's sleeping now, and according to one tradition, he had the box under his head, according to another tradition, he had it under his feet, but nevertheless, he said, I'm not waking up my father. I don't care about the financial loss. So these Jews assumed, wait a second, this doesn't make sense. All he is basically saying is he wants a higher price, right? Projection, the way they think, they projected it on him, and they offered him much more. And they offered him double, triple, he wouldn't budge. Eventually they get the point, and they begin their journey back. Eventually he catches up with them and says, guess what? Finally, the hangover was over. My father woke up, and I'm willing to sell it to you. I was able to get the keys. So they were willing to give him the higher price offer, the later price. And he said, no, I'm not going to make money off the fact that my father was sleeping, and I wouldn't wake up my father. And he sold them the stone. A beautiful story. The idea of kibud of, well, we should teach it to the kids maybe, because that would be beneficial. Maybe they could learn a lesson of kibud of va'em.
Don't we know the story with a Jewish name attached to it? Not.
A Jewish name.
Yeah, I remember the story, but it wasn't the guy who was the hero.
So you got the edited version of it. An edited version.
Poetic license.
Yeah, I give out. So now,
Couldn't have been a guy, right?
Kenny's done. Anyway. So now he got payment from above. He merited that the next year, one of his cows gave birth to a red heifer. There was a very high price for it. Paraduma. Wonderful. Fine. But then the Gemara walks away sharing with us the following. You want to know which one of the stones were lost? Like no one was curious? Which one of the stones was it? So we are told that it was stone number 12, known as the Yoshfeh. The Yoshfeh. Yeshpeh. Yeshpeh. Very good. So what is the symbol of Yoshpeh? Yoshpeh. So number 1, which tribe does it correspond to? Number 12. Number 12 is Binyamin, actually. Binyamin in this case. Binyamin. Fine. So they say Yoshpeh, that you have a mouth, but nevertheless you don't use it, is a sign of tzniut. Relates to Esther, to Shaul. Shaul was a humble individual. But there's something there as well. When it comes to the tribes of Israel, how many of them gave Agmas Nefesh? How many of them caused a tremendous amount of pain? Or which ones of them caused pain to their father? Which ones did? Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Issachar, Zvulun, even Yosef. Yosef didn't send for 20-something years, 22 years. He couldn't send a fax, an email, nothing to his father that he is alive. They say, okay, we're going to come up with different explanations why, but the reality is that they all caused their father tsar. Which one of them was really the king in the Kibbutz of Va'em realm? Binyamin. So there's no coincidence that the stone itself mentioned Tesava and in this week's parsha the Yoshpeh, which is one of Kibbutz of Va'em, is the stone where we learn a beautiful story of a non-Jew who did the mitzvah of Kibbutz of Va'em. One more incident into a stone, which the 11th stone, the Shoham, so our scroll, of course, will translate it as a Shoham, meaning we don't know what it is, just the Shoham. But others say it's the which one? Onyx? What was it again? Onyx. Some of them, it goes back to Rav Sadia Gaon. They say it's the onyx. Different types. Notes Rabbeinu Bechia, so this is, I think, a 12th century authority, that Yosef had the quality of being that he would interact with people and he would find favor in their eyes. He interacted well. He had some kind of positive vibes on him. And Rabbeinu Bechia notes that if you carry on you the stone of the Shoham, it also gives you that quality of Yosef. That's what he says. In other words, you have an onyx on you. There will be positive vibes, and people will find you with some kind of favorable light. That's what he says. So after I heard that, I went ahead and I found myself these cheap cufflinks with onyx. Problem is, of course, that the kids saw it and they wanted it, and then I don't know where they are anymore, but that doesn't make a difference. But the reality is that I got inspired, and especially if you ever have to go ahead and meet someone, a business deal, that you want to be sure to wear your onyx. And according to Rabbeinu Bechia, you are in good company because you are following the tradition of Yosef. No. Very good. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. We'll see you, B'ezrat Hashem, next week as we begin Vayikra.
At the beginning, we were talking about Moshe.
Yes.
Is that every year or just